St. Matthew's Church rose against the gray Pittsburgh sky, its ancient stone walls swallowing light rather than reflecting it. Inside, the air carried a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. Guests whispered behind gloved hands as Claire Harrington stepped onto the aisle runner, each footfall echoing like a verdict. She held a bouquet of white lilies that felt too heavy, their scent mixing with incense in a way that made her stomach twist. It was a wedding in appearance, but every detail suggested mourning. At the end of the aisle, Dr. Ethan Hart stood motionless, tall, impeccably dressed, marble carved into a man. His expression was unreadable, his gaze locked somewhere above Claire's head, as if refusing to acknowledge the tragedy unfolding before him. When the priest invited them to face each other, Ethan finally looked down. His eyes were the color of cold steel, holding no joy, no gentleness, not even curiosity. They looked like commitment forged under pressure rather than choice. The ceremony proceeded with mechanical efficiency, vows repeated without emotion, rings exchanged with the precision of a business transaction. Claire's fingers trembled only once, when she felt the band slide onto her hand. Her pulse raced, not from excitement, but from the stark realization that she had stepped fully into the cage built for her. No one watching could have guessed that this union had nothing to do with love and everything to do with debt, power, and a mother's life hanging by a thread. The applause was polite. The smiles were practiced. Outside, photographers captured images destined for society pages that would label the event as elegant and tasteful. Claire saw none of it. Her mind was still inside the church, hearing the echo of her own footsteps and the soft voice of the priest saying what God had supposedly joined. She wondered if heaven had truly witnessed this, or if even the angels had looked away. The limousine doors shut with a muted thud, sealing the two of them inside a polished cage on wheels. Leather seats, city skyline, the faint hum of traffic. Claire sat with her hands on her lap, gripping her bouquet as if it were the only thing anchoring her to the present. Ethan stared out the opposite window, rigid posture betraying the tension simmering beneath his calm facade. For a long stretch, neither spoke, the silence thicker than the winter air outside. When the car turned onto Fifth Avenue, Ethan finally broke the stillness. His voice was low, steady, sharpened by resentment. He did not look at her as he spoke. Claire felt each word hit her like cold water. She had known this was not a romance. She had known he resented the marriage, but hearing it stated so plainly made her draw a breath she struggled to steady. The city lights blurred past their window, but Claire saw none of them. She felt only the crushing truth settling over her. This was not a beginning. It was a sentence. And as the limousine carried them toward their new life, she understood fully that nothing about this day had been meant to celebrate love. It had only marked the burial of whatever freedom she had left. The limousine rolled toward the reception hall, its tinted windows reflecting the restless glow of Pittsburgh's skyline. Inside, the silence felt suffocating, as if the air itself refused to move. Claire sat rigidly against the cool leather, her bouquet now resting limp beside her. Ethan had not looked at her once since they left the cathedral. Even now, his gaze remained fixed on the passing streets, jaw clenched in a way that betrayed the storm he refused to show. She tried to speak at first, a small, tentative breach into the void between them, but Ethan cut her off with a clipped declaration of schedule. 3 hours at the reception, a dance for the cameras, a shared appearance to please certain benefactors and keep rumors from blooming. Then he was gone at dawn for surgery. Precision, expectation, obligation. There was nothing of partnership in his tone. Claire studied him quietly, trying to decipher the man who was now tethered to her life. His tuxedo still clung perfectly to him, every line sharp, every movement controlled. But beneath the composure she sensed bitterness, not anger at her specifically, but resentment shaped long before she entered the picture. He finally spoke again, barely above a murmur, yet each word carried the weight of a lifetime of pressure. This was not our wedding day. This was an acquisition, an exchange of debts and names forged by people who cared nothing for what either of them wanted. The truth was not new to Claire, but hearing it stripped her last illusions. She stared at her hands, remembering the sterile brightness of the hospital where her mother lay hooked to machines. She recalled the ink bleeding through medical bills, each number a blade. The day she signed the marriage contract still haunted her. It had been Vincent Hart, Ethan's father, who offered salvation with a polished smile and a promise wrapped in manipulation. Her mother would live, Claire would marry Ethan. The terms had been presented like a charitable gift, though she knew the truth. She had been bought. Outside the window, a river of headlights flowed across the bridges. Pittsburgh looked beautiful from here, but Claire felt no awe, only the dull ache of sacrifice. She had traded freedom for the chance to keep her mother breathing. Every breath Rose Harrington took now was paid for by Claire's choices, by this union, by the man sitting inches away who refused to look at her. The limousine slowed as they approached the reception venue. Claire could already hear the muffled swell of music, laughter, and the clinking of champagne flutes. Ethan straightened his cuffs as if preparing for surgery rather than a celebration. Before the door opened, he finally met her eyes. His stare held no warmth but carried a shadow of pity, as if he saw the cost she had borne. It was the first human look he had given her all day. "Do not expect anything from me," his expression warned. "Not comfort, not affection, not a life beyond duty." Claire drew a long, steady breath. She did not shrink from his gaze. She had already given up everything to be here. Now she stepped out of the car into the glittering world that awaited, knowing that every smile she would give tonight was a mask, and the price of wearing it was carved deep into her heart. 3 years earlier, the Harrington Mansion had stood as the pride of Shadyside, an architectural relic of old Pittsburgh nobility. Sunlight had once spilled across its mahogany floors and oil portraits, filling the vast halls with a quiet, dignified grandeur. Now dust floated in the beams of afternoon light, like drifting remnants of a dying era. Claire stood in her father's former study, staring at the strangers in polo shirts who catalogued her family's life with indifferent efficiency. Clipboards clicked, cameras flashed. Every item was tagged, priced, and classified for auction. The Harrington Crystal Collection would bring a good sum. The antique grandfather clock was a coveted piece. Even the portraits of her great-grandparents were assigned a figure, stripped of sentiment and history and reduced to inventory. Claire's chest tightened as she listened to the murmured assessments. Each word hammered home the truth that their world was collapsing piece by piece. Across the room, her mother Rose sat rigidly in a faded armchair, her hands trembling in her lap. She asked the same question she had asked every hour that week. "Where is he?" Claire did not answer. Her father had vanished again, disappearing into the fog of shattered promises and gambling debts that trailed behind him like a curse. When the pharmaceutical company her family built over generations fell into liquidation, he had retreated deeper into denial, drowning in addiction rather than facing the ruin he caused. An appraiser cleared his throat, politely impatient. The bank required the house to be vacated by the end of the month. They had 4 days. 4 days to pack an entire lineage into a handful of boxes. 4 days to say goodbye to every corridor, every memory, every piece of who they once were. That night, Claire sorted through old photo albums with her mother, lingering over images of happier years. She tried to smile, tried to pretend that the collapse of everything they knew was survivable. But Rose's facade finally cracked. She collapsed with a suddenness that paralyzed Claire with fear. The ambulance lights turned the once majestic front door into a jagged opening to chaos. At the hospital, the diagnosis came swiftly and brutally: a severe heart attack. Months of financial stress, skipped meals, and emotional fatigue had taken a catastrophic toll. In the fluorescent glare of the corridor, Dr. Morrison spoke gently but without illusion. Surgery, intensive medication, long-term care. The cost sheet flashed in Claire's hands like a sentence she could never escape. Even with insurance, the burden was staggering. Claire had 3 part-time jobs and a fraction of her former tuition fund. None of it would be enough. She sat helpless in a family waiting room that smelled of antiseptic and fear, her future dissolving beneath the weight of numbers she could never repay. And then Vincent Hart appeared. Smooth-voiced, impeccably dressed, benevolent in appearance. He offered warmth, reassurance, and a promise cloaked in generosity. Rose would get the finest care. Every expense would be handled. All Claire had to do was listen. All she had to do was consider a proposal that felt like a chain disguised as mercy. It was in that moment, as the machines kept her mother alive, that the foundation of Claire's fate was laid. The Harrington legacy had fallen, and she was about to be bound into another family's ambition. Snow fell softly against the tall windows of the Duquesne Club, muting the city outside and wrapping the elegant dining room in a deceptive calm. Crystal chandeliers glowed above polished mahogany, casting warm light over the table where Claire sat opposite Vincent Hart. The smell of butter and herbs from a bowl of lobster bisque did little to settle the unease in her stomach. The man across from her smiled with practiced gentleness, his silver hair perfectly combed, his cufflinks gleaming like quiet warnings. He spoke of her mother's progress first, reassuring her that Rose was stable, though still dangerously fragile. Claire clung to the hope in his words, but his eyes carried something else, a calculation hidden beneath the kindness. He shifted their conversation with seamless precision to discuss long-term care, and then with the same softness a surgeon might use before delivering a devastating prognosis, he presented the true reason he had invited her here. It is a mutually beneficial arrangement, Claire. Your mother receives care for as long as she needs. You are freed from the burdens that have consumed you. My son Ethan gains a partner with a name that still opens doors. The words struck Claire like cold water. She felt the room tilt slightly, as if gravity had betrayed her. Marriage, not love, not choice, a transaction. A merging of necessity and ambition. She realized in that moment that Vincent had never simply been a benevolent family friend. He had been circling like a patient predator waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Claire thought of her father's debts. She thought of their empty refrigerator and the eviction notices on their old apartment door. Most of all, she thought of the machines keeping her mother alive, machines Vincent now controlled. Her throat tightened as she attempted to respond, but no words would come. He reached for her hand gently, almost paternally, as if offering comfort instead of tightening the noose. Think of it as restoring what was lost. Your family sacrificed everything for others in the past. Let me return the favor. That night, Claire sat beside her mother's hospital bed, watching Rose sleep beneath the soft beeping of monitors. Tubes and wires traced delicate lines across her mother's body, outlining a future she could not afford. Claire held her mother's frail hand and tried to imagine another path. Could she take more jobs? Could they move again? Could she risk losing her mother to a state facility that might neglect her care? Every possibility crumbled beneath the weight of reality. Rose stirred, her eyes fluttering open. "What are you thinking about, darling?" Claire forced a smile that cracked around the edges. Nothing important, just planning things. But inside her chest, something shattered. She already knew her decision. She had known it the moment Vincent laid out his terms with velvet-wrapped brutality. By the next morning, Vincent had arranged everything. A marriage date, a press-friendly narrative, a set of expectations delivered with warm congratulations. Claire signed the final documents in a small administrative office at the hospital, her signature sealing a future she could neither outrun nor refuse. She walked out into the cold air afterward, her breath visible, sharp, unsteady. Somewhere behind her, her mother slept safely because of the deal she had just made. And somewhere across the city, Ethan Hart was unaware that his life had just been altered by the same silent bargain. The storm outside Vincent Hart's office had quieted, but inside, the tension crackled like static. Ethan stood in front of his father's massive walnut desk, rein still clinging to the shoulders of his coat, his expression carved from disbelief and fury. Vincent watched him with the calm detachment of a man presenting a surgical case, not the life-altering decree he had just delivered. "You will marry Claire Harrington." The words still echoed through Ethan's mind like a struck bell. He had replayed them in the elevator, in the hallway, and now here, face to face with the man who had orchestrated his life since childhood. He felt his pulse pounding through his fingertips. He could not comprehend it. Claire was a stranger, someone he had spoken to only in brief passing at hospital charity events years before. And now he was meant to bind his life to hers for the sake of a name his father coveted more than oxygen. He leaned forward, palms flat on the desk, voice low but deadly sharp.
"What about Ava? We planned the future. We planned everything."
His father did not flinch. "Ava is a model," he replied coolly. "Beautiful, charming, and incapable of offering what this family needs. She is temporary. A Harrington is legacy." Ethan felt the floor shift beneath him. He had expected anger, arguments, manipulation maybe, but not dismissal that cold, that absolute. The father who had pushed him to excellence, to awards, to medical mastery, now reduced his personal life to a strategic inconvenience, a stumbling block, a liability. "And if I refuse?" The challenge hung in the air like a blade. Vincent folded his hands, the predator finally shedding its gentle disguise. "Then you will find yourself with far fewer opportunities at the Anderson Heart Medical Center. Positions can be reassigned, department heads replaced, promises withdrawn." The implication was clear. Ethan's meteoric rise to department head had not been a gift, but leverage, a chain disguised as achievement. His father had shaped every inch of his career and could just as easily dismantle it. The threat seeped into Ethan's bones, cold and suffocating. Hours later, Ethan stood outside Ava's apartment. She opened the door with a half-smile that faded instantly at the look in his eyes. He didn't have to explain. She already knew. She had always known the gravity of his father's influence. Her laugh was bitter as she crossed her arms, leaning against the doorframe. "Your father has been circling that girl like a shark since the bankruptcy. Everyone could see it coming except you." He wanted to argue, deny it, apologize, but there was nothing left to say. She closed the door before he could finish his goodbye. 6 weeks later, Ethan stood at an altar watching Claire approach in a slow, graceful procession of white silk and silent despair. He saw the cost in her eyes, the fear she tried to mask, and felt something break inside himself. They were both prisoners, caught in a web spun long before either of them had a chance to protest. When the vows ended and the kiss sealed their contract, Ethan felt every door of his old life slam shut. As Claire's hand trembled in his, one truth crystallized with agonizing clarity. They were bound not by love, but by sacrifice. Not by choice, but by the ambitions of a man who had shaped both their destinies. And Ethan knew, as he stepped into the limousine beside her, that somewhere in the fallout of this entrapment, something inside him was beginning to unravel. The penthouse at 1 Oxford Center had once gleamed in the pages of architectural magazines, its glass walls rising above the Pittsburgh skyline like the crown of a kingdom. But for Claire, stepping into it for the first time as Ethan's wife felt less like entering a home and more like being ushered into a fortress designed to keep people out. The marble floors reflected the cold overhead lighting. The abstract art on the walls offered beauty without warmth. Every surface was pristine, untouched, and mercilessly empty. Ethan guided her only as far as the entryway before retreating behind the practiced armor he had worn since their vows. "Your room is down the east hallway," he said in a clipped tone that reminded her of a surgeon delivering discharge instructions. He did not look at her suitcase, the single battered piece of luggage that held the remains of her past life. The door to his home office clicked shut before she could even gather a response. The days that followed carved out a routine of deliberate distance. Ethan left before sunrise, the sound of the door closing his only goodbye. Claire woke each morning to a cavernous apartment where her footsteps echoed back at her like unanswered questions. She filled her hours visiting her mother, bringing warm soup and fresh flowers to brighten Rose's private hospital suite. Vincent had arranged comfort and care so lavish it bordered on surreal. Yet Claire could not shake the awareness that every inch of her mother's safety was payment she owed. When she returned home in the evenings, the penthouse was dim and quiet. Often, Ethan did not return until long past midnight, moving through the kitchen with silent efficiency before disappearing again. They spoke only when necessary, offering polite greetings that felt brittle and hollow. Ethan was courteous, even gentle at times, but always remote. A ghost inhabiting the same space, but never sharing it. One late afternoon, Claire attempted to bridge the gap, preparing a simple dinner and waiting in the living room for Ethan to come home. When he entered, exhausted and carrying the weight of the hospital on his shoulders, she offered him a soft smile and a plate of food. His expression softened only momentarily before the distance returned. "Thank you," he said, "but I ate at the hospital."
His voice was polite, but the dismissal sliced through her carefully built hope.
He disappeared into his office, and moments later, the muted sound of his keyboard filled the hallway, a reminder that she was intruding on a life that had never been meant to include her. The first true crack came 3 weeks into this cold coexistence. Ethan had forgotten his personal phone on the kitchen island, and when it rang, Claire answered instinctively, fearing an emergency. Instead, she heard the voice of a woman, polished and confident, overflowing with longing she had no right to hear. Claire tried to sever the call quickly, but the damage was done. The woman's final words pierced through her like a blade. "Tell my fiancé Ethan that Rebecca called." When Ethan returned later that night and saw the phone on the counter, the confrontation that followed ruptured the fragile quiet they had maintained. Claire's voice was steady, but her heart was breaking as she asked questions he avoided with surgical precision. The truth emerged in brutal fragments. He had ended things only days before their wedding. The woman he had intended to marry still believed he was hers. By the time Ethan stormed out, the penthouse door slamming behind him, Claire felt the marble floors tilt beneath her feet. The home she had tried to shape into something livable had revealed its true nature. It was a cage built of silence, resentment, and obligations neither she nor Ethan had chosen. And in that vast, echoing emptiness, she realized she had never felt more alone. The hospital gala at the Omni William Penn shimmered with chandeliers and polished ambition, a stage crafted for the elite to congratulate themselves beneath rivers of champagne. Claire stepped into the ballroom on Ethan's arm, her dress a smooth sweep of midnight blue that made her look every bit the elegant wife everyone expected her to be. But inside she felt hollow, as if her ribs were carved out to make room for the lies she carried. Ethan played his part flawlessly. His hand rested at the small of her back, warm but possessive, a gesture meant for the cameras and the watching donors. He charmed board members with a polite ease that belied the cold distance between them. Claire smiled when required, laughed on cue, drifted through conversations with spouses of surgeons who spoke of vacation homes and charity luncheons as if real problems were myths. She was invisible except when Ethan needed her to be seen. Halfway through the evening, he leaned close, his breath brushing her ear with the polished intimacy of performance. "Darling, an emergency consult. I need to step outside." She nodded, stiff, and Ethan slipped toward the terrace with the urgency of a man eager to escape. In his haste, he left his personal phone on the table beside their untouched champagne flutes. It lit up moments later. Claire glanced automatically, expecting a colleague's name or a hospital alert. Instead, the name Rebecca glowed bright against the dim screen. Her breath caught. A new message appeared beneath it. "Missing you tonight. Wish I could be your date instead of pretending with her." The world narrowed to a pinpoint. The laughter and orchestral music faded into a muffled hum as Claire reached for the phone with trembling fingers. Her heart pounded so violently she thought the people around her might hear it. For a long moment, she stared at the message, willing it to be a misunderstanding. But her intuition whispered a truth she had been avoiding since the night Rebecca called the penthouse. She unlocked the phone, guessing his passcode with grim ease. The year of his mother's death. She hesitated only one breath before entering it. The message thread unfolded like a dam bursting. Weeks of texts, secret meetings, inside jokes that spoke of intimacy long shared. Pictures she refused to open. Plans arranged with a careless ease that mocked the vows she had taken. Her eyes traced the dates, each one a fresh cut. Tuesday, last Tuesday. He had come home after midnight claiming an emergency surgery. He had smelled of expensive perfume, not antiseptic. Every suspicion she had buried bloomed into certainty. Ethan's voice suddenly materialized behind her. "Sorry, that consult took longer than I expected." He stopped mid-sentence, eyes landing on the phone in her hand, then on her face. The color drained from him. Claire rose slowly, her movements deliberate, controlled only by the thin thread of her resolve. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it throbbed with devastation. Emergency surgery. Is that what you are calling it now?" Silence fell between them like a thunderclap. Ethan reached for her arm. Claire stepped back. "We should go home," he said, his voice strained, as though he could bundle the evening into neat apology. But the word home no longer meant anything. The drive back to the penthouse stretched into a suffocating eternity. Ethan stared straight ahead. Claire stared out the window, watching the city blur into streaks of gold. Her world felt suspended, hollowed out, preparing to collapse. When the door clicked shut behind them, the facade finally cracked. 3 months, she whispered. "We have been married 3 months and you never stop seeing her." Ethan tried to speak. Claire raised her hand, silencing him with the quiet fury of someone who has finally seen the truth. "Explain how you kissed me for photographs and went to her for comfort. Explain how you made me a fool in my own home." Their voices ricocheted through the marble halls, sharp and aching. Every sentence peeled back another layer of pain. Ethan's defenses splintered. Claire's composure shattered. For the first time since their wedding, every mask fell away. When Ethan grabbed his keys and stormed out, slamming the door with the force of a breaking life, Claire collapsed onto the cold floor. Her hands trembled violently as she fought for breath. She had sacrificed everything to save her mother, her freedom, her future, her heart. And tonight, she learned the brutal truth. Ethan had never sacrificed anything at all. The night swallowed Ethan the moment he sped out of the parking garage, the engine's roar echoing through the cold Pittsburgh streets like a wounded animal. Rain streaked across the windshield, blurring traffic lights into bleeding halos of red and gold. His hands trembled violently on the steering wheel, Claire's words reverberating through him with the precision of scalpels. Each accusation struck deeper than the last. "Coward. Liar. You had it all." He pressed harder on the accelerator, as if speed could strip the truth from him, as if the blur of asphalt and neon could silence the echo of Claire's heartbreak. He had seen rage before, in operating rooms and emergencies, but nothing compared to the devastation in her eyes. It had hollowed him out. For years he believed himself immune to vulnerability, fortified by ambition and emotional distance. Yet a single look from her had torn straight through every wall he had built. At a red light on Fifth Avenue, he slammed the heel of his hand against the steering wheel. The impact stung, but did nothing to quiet the storm inside him. He remembered the moment she looked at him across the penthouse living room, eyes shimmering with betrayal and disbelief. She had given up her life, her dreams, her very freedom to save her mother, and he had repaid her with deception. Lightning cracked across the sky. Ethan inhaled sharply, chest tight. For the first time, he confronted the truth that terrified him most. He hadn't resented Claire. He hadn't pushed her away out of indifference. He had pushed her away because she mattered too much. Because she saw him in ways no one ever had. Because she had the terrifying power to hurt him, the same power he had vowed never to allow anyone after his mother's death. The light turned green. He accelerated too quickly, the wheels skidding briefly. The speedometer climbed past 60, 70, 80. The city blurred past in streaks of rain-soaked light. He barely noticed the wet asphalt beneath him, or the frantic honking of a taxi he cut off. All he heard was Claire's voice cracking with anguish. "I am your wife, and you made me a fool." He swallowed, breath shaking. He had married her in resentment. But somewhere between the silence, the shared spaces, the fragile, almost conversations, she had carved her way into him. And losing her felt like losing breath, losing direction, losing himself. 90 miles per hour now. The wipers strained against the downpour. Ethan's vision wavered. A pang shot through his chest, a sharp twist of regret and fear. He whispered her name into the darkness. Claire. As if the sound alone could tether him back, as if saying it could undo what he had broken. A blinding flash of headlights erupted to his left. He saw it too late. The semi-truck barreled through the intersection, already halfway across when Ethan's car crossed the red light. Time seemed to slow. His breath seized. Metal screamed. The world fractured in an instant of catastrophic violence. Glass shattered like falling stars. The impact seized his body, hurling him sideways. Pain exploded across his ribs. The steering column crushed inward. His head slammed against the window. Darkness surged at the edges of his vision. In the frozen, suspended second before everything went black, one image pierced through the chaos. Claire standing in their doorway, eyes filled not with fury but with heartbreak so profound it had stripped him bare. His last conscious thought was a silent plea, not for his own life, but for the chance to tell her the truth, that he was falling, that he had been falling for her long before he realized it. Then the world collapsed into darkness, and Ethan Hart's life hung suspended between destruction and the possibility of something reborn. 3 months after the crash, the penthouse no longer resembled the sterile monument it had once been. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows in warm, softened rays, catching on the small signs of life scattered throughout the living space. A folded blanket draped over the arm of the sofa. A half-read book left on the side table. A faint scent of chamomile that lingered like a whispered promise of calm. The clinical silence that had once defined the apartment had been replaced by something gentler, something quietly human. In the center of the living room stood the hospital bed that had arrived without ceremony in the early days following Ethan's return. Monitors, medication schedules, bandages, and durable medical equipment had gathered around it like attendants to a wounded king. Yet Claire had somehow transformed even this corner into a place of warmth. A vase of tulips sat on the bedside table. A soft lamp cast a gentle glow at night. A knit throw blanket lay neatly folded at the foot of the bed, always within reach. Ethan sat now in his wheelchair beside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the late afternoon sun painting his features in muted gold. He looked smaller somehow, not in stature but in presence. The arrogant surgeon who once moved with relentless precision and unshakable confidence had been stripped down to a quieter, more fragile version of himself. His movements were slower, his breaths measured, his voice softer. But his eyes, once cold steel, were changing. The edges had softened, the sharpness had dulled. Something new lived there now. Claire entered the room carrying a tray with a bowl of steaming soup. Her steps were quiet, careful not to startle him, though he had already sensed her presence. She stopped beside him and placed the tray on a small table, her smile gentle but firm. "Lunch," she said softly. He stiffened with a familiar flicker of pride. "I can feed myself." "I know," she replied, pulling a chair closer, her tone warm with a touch of teasing. "Humor me. Just for today." He hesitated, then relented. A silent surrender passed between them. Claire lifted the spoon to his lips, her movements steady and attentive. When her fingers brushed his as she adjusted the bowl, neither of them pulled away. The contact was brief but electric, a quiet acknowledgement of a shift neither dared to name. "You have gotten better at this," Ethan murmured, eyes lowered. "At taking care of you?" she asked lightly. "No, at being near me without flinching." Claire's smile wavered for a moment, caught off guard. She searched his face, seeing not the doctor with walls of steel, but the man underneath, bruised and human. "You have not bitten me in 2 weeks," she said softly. "That helps." A laugh escaped him, surprising them both. A real laugh, rare and unguarded. Claire's heart stuttered at the sound. Silence followed, but it was no longer harsh or empty. It was a stillness that held possibility. Then Ethan spoke, his voice rough with memory. "Do you think I was born this bitter?" Claire tilted her head, listening. "No, I think someone taught you to be." He swallowed hard, shadows flickering in his eyes. "My mother died when I was 8. By the time they found the cancer, it was everywhere. My father buried himself in work. I had to learn how to be the strong one before I even understood what strength meant." Claire stayed still, afraid to break the fragile honesty spilling from him. "I promised myself no one would matter again. No one would be allowed close enough to hurt me. Not Ava, not friends, no one." His eyes lifted to hers, bare and vulnerable. "But you terrified me. You saw through everything. You were not impressed. You did not bend." Claire's heart clenched. He exhaled a shuddering breath. "The closer you got, the more I wanted to let you matter." Before she could respond, the doorbell chimed. She rose to answer it and returned holding a bouquet of white tulips wrapped in simple brown paper. Her voice faltered. "There is no name." Ethan shifted awkwardly, his blush faint but undeniable. "They're from me." She stared, stunned. He looked almost boyish in his discomfort. "I thought it was time I said thank you properly." Inside the bouquet was a small card. His handwriting was sharp and precise, but the words were gentle. "For the woman who stayed when she did not have to, who saw me when I could not see myself. This is just the beginning." Claire crossed the room with slow steps and sat at the edge of his bed. She leaned forward and pressed a soft kiss to his forehead, a gesture of comfort, of forgiveness, of something blooming. "This means more than you know," she whispered. And for the first time, Ethan Hart smiled a smile that was real. "Maybe," he said quietly, "I am finally learning." The morning light drifted gently across the penthouse, washing the hardwood floors in soft gold. Claire moved through the kitchen with practiced calm, the aroma of fresh coffee surrounding her like a small shield. Each day now began with a fragile rhythm she had built around Ethan's recovery. Medication, breakfast, physical therapy, gentle conversation, silence when needed. She had grown accustomed to the quiet, to the slow rebuilding of a man she once believed impossible to reach. She carried a cup of tea toward the living room when a crisp white envelope on the console table caught her attention. It had not been there the night before. No stamps, no return address, only her name written with deliberate care. Claire. Her breath hitched. She reached for it, fingertips brushing the paper as though it might dissolve. For a long moment she simply stood there, the weight of the past months pressing against her chest. Then she opened it. Inside was a single sheet of stationery. The handwriting was steady but unmistakably his. "Claire, I owe you the truth. All of it." She sank slowly onto the couch, her heart tightening. Ethan was asleep down the hall, unaware of the storm his letter was about to awaken. The words unfolded with raw honesty she had never expected from him. "I lied when I said you meant nothing to me. The truth is you meant too much. You walked into my life with quiet determination and refused to be shaped by the world that shaped me. You challenged me. You steadied me. You frightened me because I saw in you the one thing I did not know how to face: hope." Claire closed her eyes, fighting the sting behind them. "When we married, I resented the circumstances. I resented my father. I resented the obligation. But I never resented you. I admired you long before I admitted it to myself." The letter grew more vulnerable with every line. Rebecca was never about betrayal. She was a place to hide from the version of myself that terrified me. The man I became with you was not something I knew how to sustain. I pushed you away because I felt unworthy, because I wanted to want you and hated myself for it. Claire's breath trembled. The room felt smaller, the air too still. The night of the gala, when you looked at me with devastation instead of anger, I understood something I had spent years avoiding. Loving you was not the danger. Losing you was. She felt her pulse falter, a painful reminder of nights when she had cried herself to sleep in the guest room while he drifted further away. The crash stripped everything from me, my control, my career, my certainty. But it gave me clarity. It showed me the truth I should have admitted long before. I want our marriage, not the version forced upon us, the version we could build if I learn how to be the man you thought I was. Tears slipped down her cheeks. I cannot undo the hurt I caused. I cannot erase the nights I left you questioning your worth. But I can rebuild what I broke, brick by brick, day by day, if you will allow me. Claire covered her mouth with her hand as the final lines struck deep. If you choose to walk away, I will accept it. If you choose to stay, I will spend the rest of my life learning how to be the man you deserve. She lowered the letter slowly, her vision blurred, her pulse unsteady. Every emotion she had locked away began to rise and twist inside her. Grief, hope, fear, longing. She had loved him long before she admitted it, long before he earned it. long before he even realized she existed beside him as more than an obligation. Now, the man down the hallway was not the cold surgeon who had once dismissed her. He was someone learning to be gentle, someone learning to be human, someone learning to love. She stood, gripping the letter tightly, and walked toward his room. Her heartbeat echoed in her ears with each step. When she reached the door, she paused. Ethan sat awake in his bed, watching her with uncertainty, as though bracing for a verdict that could shatter him. Claire lifted the letter slightly, her voice trembling. "Thank you for telling me. Now let us see where the truth takes us." And for the first time, Ethan exhaled as though he had been holding his breath for months. The living room glowed softly beneath the warm light of a single lamp, casting long shadows across the floor as dusk settled over the city. Claire stood near the windows, her hands loosely clasped, her pulse steady but charged with an anticipation she could not quite name. Behind her, the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of the wall clock filled the silence Ethan and she had both grown familiar with. Yet tonight, that silence felt different, not empty, not strained, simply waiting. Ethan moved slowly from the hallway, leaning lightly on his cane. His steps were measured, each one deliberate, each one a reminder of how far he had come since the night the world tore apart around him. The healing scars along his ribs tugged with every breath, but the ache in his chest came from something deeper, something human, something new. Claire turned to him, her expression unreadable but open, softer than it had been in many months. She motioned toward the couch. He nodded, crossing the last few steps, and lowered himself with care. She sat across from him, not close enough to touch, but close enough that the air between them felt charged, alive with the weight of everything unsaid. For a long time, they simply looked at each other. It was Ethan who finally broke the quiet, his voice low. "You read the letter." Claire nodded, her gaze steady. "Yes." And her fingers tightened slightly in her lap. She searched his face, studying the man before her. He was no longer the surgeon who navigated life with arrogant certainty. That version of him had shattered on the asphalt. What remained was someone humbled, stripped raw, trying to rebuild from a place of truth rather than pride. "I believe you meant every word you wrote," she said quietly. He let out a breath he had been holding since she entered the room. "But belief is not the same as trust," she continued. Ethan nodded, accepting the blow even as it stung. "I know." She rose from her seat and crossed the room to the bookshelf, retrieving a small leather journal. She returned and placed it gently on the coffee table between them. "My mother kept this when she was in the hospital. She wrote about fear and anger and loneliness, but on one page, she wrote something different." Claire paused, her eyes drifting briefly toward the city lights. She said healing requires two things: truth and effort. Ethan swallowed hard. Claire opened the journal to a worn page and read the lines softly. "Love is not a feeling. It is a decision made every single day." She closed the book, her voice barely above a whisper. "I want to try, but I need to know you will not run again. Not from honesty, not from vulnerability, not from me." Ethan leaned forward, pain flickering through his ribs but not stopping him. "I ran because I thought love made me weak, because I was afraid of losing someone the way I lost my mother. But you have shown me that loving someone can be strength, that letting someone in does not break you, it remakes you." Claire felt a tremor move through her chest, a fragile emotion she had buried under months of disappointment. "I cannot promise perfection," he said, "but I can promise honesty. I can promise effort. I can promise that I will never again choose fear over you." She did not respond immediately. Instead, she walked to the window, needing the space of a few breaths to steady herself. Rain began tapping against the glass, gentle and rhythmic. The city looked softer through its veil, as though urging her to listen. She turned back. "Then start by telling me why you wanted to push me away, even after the crash." He hesitated, but then the truth came. "Because waking up and seeing you by my bed made me feel unworthy of every breath. Because I did not know how to exist with someone who stayed when they had every reason to leave." Her eyes softened. And now, he whispered, rising carefully from the couch and taking a slow step toward her. Now I want to prove myself worthy of every moment you choose to stay. For the first time in months, she reached out. Her fingers brushed his. Light. Testing. Real. The faintest smile touched her lips. Then let us rebuild. Not from the beginning, from here. Ethan entwined his fingers with hers, grounding himself in the warmth of her touch. And there, in the quiet glow of their living room, beneath the soft percussion of rain against glass, they took their first step toward a future neither had dared to imagine. Not perfect, not easy, but true. Winter slipped quietly into spring, softening the air and brightening the days as the city thawed from its long season of cold. The penthouse, once an echo of sterile elegance, now pulsed with a new kind of warmth. Blankets tossed casually over the back of the sofa, a stack of physical therapy bands tucked neatly in a basket. Fresh flowers that Claire changed every few days, a second coffee mug beside Ethan's on the counter each morning. These small details, once impossible, now carried the unmistakable weight of a life rebuilt rather than forced. Ethan stood on the balcony for the first time since the accident, leaning lightly on the railing. The wind brushed through his hair, cool but gentle, lifting the edge of the sweater he wore to hide the fading scars along his side. The city stretched before him in hues of silver and sunlit gold, alive, resilient, restless. Much like him. Much like them. Inside, Claire was on the phone with her supervisor from the clinic, discussing the possibility of returning part-time. Her voice carried a steadiness Ethan had not heard in months. Calm, confident, certain. When she stepped onto the balcony to join him, her presence filled the space effortlessly, grounding him with a quiet strength he had once taken for granted. They stood side by side without speaking. The silence between them had changed. It was no longer made of distance or unspoken wounds. It was an easiness, a shared breath, a space where healing could settle without urgency. Claire's hand brushed his, just lightly enough for him to feel the invitation without pressure. He turned his palm upward and intertwined their fingers. She looked at him, her eyes soft yet sure. "You walked out here on your own today," he smiled slightly. "Not entirely on my own. You have been behind every step, even the ones I took alone." Claire's expression wavered with emotion. She exhaled and leaned her shoulder against his. There was a time not long ago when such a gesture would have felt foreign between them. Now it felt inevitable. Ethan reached into his pocket and withdrew a small, folded paper. He handed it to her without a word. Claire opened it, her brow furrowing gently as she read the neatly written sentence inside. "This marriage should begin with choice, not circumstance. Will you choose me today, freely, as I choose you?" Claire lifted her gaze, and for a moment her breath simply caught. Not because she was surprised, but because she felt the depth of the moment settle into her bones. This was not an apology, not a plea. It was a beginning, a real one. She folded the paper again with careful hands and slipped it into her pocket, as though she planned to keep it forever. "Yes," she said quietly, "but only if you choose me every day after today." Ethan nodded, a slow, steady motion full of certainty. "That is the easiest promise I will ever make." They stood together as a warm gust of wind rose from the streets below, lifting strands of Claire's hair. Ethan reached out instinctively, tucking the loose strands behind her ear with a tenderness that felt new yet natural. She did not pull away. Instead, she turned toward him, her hands sliding up the front of his sweater, resting just above the steady rhythm of his heart. When he kissed her, it was not the hesitant brush of grief or apology. It was quiet but certain. Acknowledgement, commitment, a vow spoken without words. They pulled apart slowly, foreheads resting together as the world around them continued its soft morning hum. "So what happens now?" Claire whispered. Ethan smiled, a real smile that softened the once rigid lines of his face. "Now we build the life we kept trying to avoid. One day at a time, one choice at a time." She nodded, eyes shining, "And we let the past stay where it belongs." Together, they turned back toward the open door of the penthouse, the home they were remaking, the life they were choosing. Inside, light stretched across the floor in long golden stripes, welcoming them into something new. Not perfect, not simple, but theirs.